Welcome to Ken and Leslie's Alaska and back. 14,000 miles to go see the Alcan Highway. As we leave the East Coast behind with a beautiful sunset, we enter the Cahokia Indian Mounds of the Mississippian people, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Illinois. And then it's a stop in Mitchell, South Dakota for the Corn Palace, the world's only corn palace where the sides, the exterior is redone every year in a different theme. Made out of husks and other fibers and everything. An interesting sight. And here is one of the hip camps. It's a website where you can sign up to get a campsite from people who offer 1 to 5 different sites on their private property. And this happened to be a site with about 60 acres, so we were quite isolated. And then we stopped to see Crazy Horse. We'd seen Crazy Horse many years ago, and he's getting closer to completion. You can actually now see his entire face. And Crazy Horse at the museum, they provide ceremonial dances and other information on the native populations. And then it was on to the Battle of Little Bighorn, which we had seen 40 years ago. But now, instead of just the grave sites of where Custer fell, they now have the grave sites honoring the Indians who were defending their land and a memorial to those Indians as well. Then we say goodbye to the continental United States, and what we're going to do is start in Bellingham and work our way up along the inside passageway to Skagway, and then we'll be driving up to Whitehorse. Now we're going to show the start from Dawson's Creek as if we were starting there all along the Alcan Highway up to Delta Junction up here, and then a trip through Alaska all the way down to the Kenai Peninsula to Valdez, and then on the way back we stopped at Dawson City, which is where the end of the Klondike was, and then back again through the United States. For the Alaska trip, one floor of cars underneath, and we could have stayed on the tented on that outside patio, but we opted for a stateroom instead. And again, now we are leaving the continental US through our inside passageway and traveling alongside is one of the Alaskan fishing boats. And this is a very typical scene along the ocean ways. As we leave along the passageway, you can see that the snow is still on the mountains since it's in June. And a stop in Sitka, where the Tlingit totem poles are now being recarved. You've got the old one, and it's serving as a model for the new one. And here's an example of the Chilkat weaving of the Tlingit people. And then a stop in Juneau, the capital of Alaska, And this is a famous house where you can actually see the Russia from, according to one of the former people who lived there, Sarah Palin. And again, a final sunset on our ferry journey. And here in Skagway is one of the old fraternal houses, and that is elk antlers that are covering part of the exterior. And of course, since it was a mining town, and here at the Red Onion, you could see the upstairs from the bar, and you'll notice the madam is going to be taking us on a tour of the facilities. Leaving Skagway, we go up the Klondike Highway. You can see on the upper right there is a train, which is the Whitehorse train to Whitehorse that was completed a few years after the gold rush had ended. In Skagway, near Skagway, we did take an airplane ride over the Glacier Bay National Park. Saw a lot of different glaciers by air, land, and sea. This is a glacier with those moraines running down to the sea. And the blue ice of the glacier cracking through. So now we're on the road to Whitehorse, and you can see the snow still is there. That's not the glacier, that's just the snowpack left. We're now in mid-June. And in Carcross, there was a little retirement home that we looked at and investigated as to whether that would be a place we could retire to. And also in Carcross is the Carcross Desert, sort of like the desert in Maine, just sand stretching for a few miles. So here is the Alaska Highway, starting, as you can see, down in Dawson Creek and running through Canada. And finally here it gets into Alaska. The official ending is in Delta Junction, but some people also say that Fairbanks is the end of it. This is one of the bridges of the original highway. It was actually, the highway was started in 1942, completed in that year, and many of the bridges were just constructed out of trees that they cut down. And then it was reconstructed again in 43 and 45 and basically has been being reconstructed since then. So here's the beginning of the Alaska Highway, or Alcan Highway, stands for Alaska Canada Highway. And it's in Dawson Creek with our trusty van ready to take us on our adventure. And the GPS says we've got 2,200 kilometers to go, and we better take a right turn in a little over 1,500 kilometers. Near Dawson's Creek is a stretch of the original highway, and this actually was still in use until a few years ago. This was a wooden bridge that was built in 1945 and still in pretty good condition except for a few of those treads that are missing. Next up is Watson Lake. During the war, one soldier put up a little milepost showing where the distance to his hometown was, and this started a tradition where now about 100,000 signs show the directions and distances, the travelers' hometowns. And of course, we've had to put up our own sign. You go and buy a piece of lumber at the local hardware store, and the tourist office offers you the drill and screws and the paint to create your sign. So you can see we are 2,745 miles from Durham, or for the metric people, 4,418 kilometers. Along the way, we took a couple of plane trips, the one over the glacier, and then we also took a float plane to see how it was to take off and land on the water. Now, a view of the Alcan Highway, places it straight, places it does a little more turning. And this was the scenery for much of the time, although it became a little flatter later on. And now, this is at the Champagne and Aziyac Center. This is where Wayne Price, who was at Tlingit, Alaska, had come up, and they had created a dugout canoe for over a period of about a year. And this is the chip burning ceremony, where they burn all of the chips that have been dug out as sort of both a memorial to the people who helped work on it, one whom had just died. More views along the way, along the highway. We could have created this entire slideshow just of pictures like this, but it would seem a little repetitive. And this is Clain Lake. The highway ran through the hills and then was relocated to the sides of the lake later on. And at Clain Lake is the Soldier Summit. That red area that you can see there is the original highway. And then it got replaced by going along the lake. But at the point here was the summit where they celebrated in November of 1942 the actual completion of the highway. This was a highway. It wasn't quite ready for full-time use. It was only going to be traversable during the winter time because of the frost issues. But this was the completion where they had pushed the road through, and they could actually get vehicles all along the way. The international boundary coming from Canada on your left into the US on the right. And now they like to say there are two seasons in Alaska, winter and road repair season. Several times along the highways, both the Alcan and the other highways, this is what you would meet. Sometimes they said maybe we should have just left everything gravel. It could have been easier to fix, but because the pavement had a lot of frost heaves which had to be redone so often. And just the equipment all along the way, so you could, if you were a road builder, you got to watch roads being rebuilt continuously. Here's one of the longest bridges over in the highway, and a typical bridge over the river. You'll notice all the gravel, which is where up in the Klondike, that was where the gold was hiding. And in Tok, Alaska, there's a sign, a little scope. You can see how high the sun gets at high noon on the shortest day of the year. Obviously, we were there on just the reverse. And this is the end of the highway in Delta Junction, Alaska. And from here, the Richardson Highway continues on to Fairbanks. And along the Richardson Highway is where the oil pipeline is located. And you can see it in various forms going across the screen. And it is crossing over one of the rivers. So the pipeline goes above ground and underground as appropriate. Here's the pipeline, closer view. You'll notice it sort of rests on a little metal bar there, and the pipeline moves back and forth along the bar as it contracts and expands due to the temperature. We met one guy who told us a story about the pipeline. It is designed to withstand bullets. However, there were two drunk gentlemen who decided one day to use some armor-piercing bullets, and they did put a hole in the pipeline where, with the pressure, it actually spurted out for about a half a mile. They were able to fix it up. $8 million worth in damage. And when they found the guys, they were trying to figure out how they would be able to collect $8 million from them. This is the Dalton Highway, which goes from Fairbanks up to Prudhoe Bay. You'll notice it is not paved at all, and there are trucks like the one here that have the right-of-way. So we decided only to do about 1 mile on this. Instead, we flew up to Fort Yukon, 8 miles above the Arctic Circle, a native village, which is the sort of the chief village for about 10 other villages in the area. You'll notice the time. That's 10 o'clock and 9 minutes after the hour on the 25th of June. And the bright sun still up in the sky north of the Arctic. We couldn't see it till midnight because we had to get back on the plane, but we experienced the 24-hour sunlight. In Fairbanks, they have an agricultural area at the university, and this is a musk ox. And the musk ox has a fur underneath called Kivet, which is a crossword puzzle answer. And it's soft fur, and they falls off, and they actually then fix it up and sell it for scarves and weaving. Previous year, we had, before our trip, we decided to enter the Nenana Ice Classic, and you'll see the poles there. They put a tower up on the ice, and they have a lottery, and whoever wins is the one who most is closest to the actual time the river breaks up. And it is all measured by laser pointers with measuring that tower and when it actually moves. We did not come anywhere close. And this is the Savage River in Denali, with one of the few hiking trails that is actually laid out. Everywhere else, you simply cut across the land. And in Denali, you take a bus in order to get to the inner part of the park. And as you'll see here, we've got a view of a caribou and a grizzly on either side of some willow trees in between. I think the caribou feels like he can smell the grizzly, but the grizzly does not know the caribou is there. We bus stuck around long enough so we could see that they departed their ways without any excitement happening. And then on our final night in Denali, we got a glimpse of the mountain itself, sort of a teaser going, okay, it's almost there. The actual, to the left, you can see the one peak, but the higher peak is actually just underneath the clouds to the left. And on the next morning, we woke up, and on our way out, we got to see Denali in all its glory. Interestingly enough, we kept driving, and we got to the other side of Denali, and it had completely clouded in and started raining on that day. So we got the view that supposedly only 1 out of 3 visitors to the park get to see. Just south of Denali, we took a train ride on the Alaska Railroad, and this was sort of a special train that goes each day to some cabins whose only access is via the rail. Here the train is stopped, and you can see its shadow over a bridge. This is the official turnaround point. And you can see the cabins on the way out. People live here year-round. The train delivers supplies, takes the people in and out of town, to the main town. And in the area, there is one of the only birch syrup making places. So unlike all of the maple syrup, birch syrup, it requires a bit more sap in order to create the same flavor. We stopped at the Iditarod headquarters, and here is Riley with his teams of dogs. He's actually a musher who's participated several times in the Iditarod. He really loves his dogs. He played around with them a lot while we were there. And for a small donation, you get to ride in the cart around a short track to feel how it is if you were going on the Iditarod. From Anchorage, we headed down to the Kenai Peninsula and then down to Homer, where we took a cruise from Homer over to Seldovia. And there's a wildlife refuge on the way with both birds all gathered together in the water, and then more birds gathered on the rock formations along the way. The bay has a tremendous tidal range, about 20 to 25 feet. And as you can see, it's low tide. It will go up to the high tide, which is about at the bottom of the red house. And over here, you'll see the no wake sign, which of course is only applicable when the tide gets much higher. Here's a picture Leslie took, one of the boats no longer in use in Homer, with all of the purple lupine in the forefront. And a puffin mask, which was utilized by the natives. And this is Anchor Point, whose claim to fame it is at the westernmost point in the United States that can be reached by a continuous road. And this is Exit Glacier on the way to Valdez. And as you can see, how far the glacier has retreated since 2005. It's about a couple of 100 yards, at least, to where the bottom of the glacier is right now. We took a ride with Captain Amy, 6 people on it, so a very small boat, and we got to see a performance of the humpback whales doing bubble feeding. In this bubble feeding, the whales go down, they start generating some bubbles, they circle around a group of fish underneath in the water, and they use the bubbles to entrap them, and they bring them up then to the surface. And you can see a bunch of birds up above who also help participate in eating the fish that the whales don't consume. And it looks something like this. The birds understand that the whales are coming up, so they fly over. They see the whales coming up. They finish their bubbles, and then the birds descend to eat what remains. And we probably watched this happen about 15 times while we were sitting on the boat. And then we saw several glaciers from the sea. This is just a up close and personal look at one of them. Capture the calving of the glacier as just a little small portion falling down into the water. As you can see, the water is covered with remnants of previous calvings. Glaciers came in all different types, and this one, as you can see, is a black and white glacier where that dark area is actually just dirt that the glacier picked up along its way. Seward is the beginning of the Iditarod Trail. The actual race now starts in Anchorage, but the actual start of the Iditarod is in Seward. And at Seward is a natural museum where you can see fish and other wildlife, and these are the salmon on their way up the river, or what they think is a river at least. And this is a puffin, up close and personal. That's the one that the mask was that we showed previously. Now, on the way to Whittier, it used to be that there was only a train that got to Whittier. The train went through this tunnel. And then a few years back, they have now opened it up to vehicular traffic. It is a one-way tunnel, so they alternate which side of the traffic, which side gets to go. And of course, the train has the right of way when it is in there. So the inside of the tunnel looks something like this. You can see that you're actually just driving over the train tracks, and you've got enough room, at least on other side. Of course, you're going completely straight, so you don't have to worry about any curves. In Whittier, of course, one more cruise that included birds and waterfalls coming off the side. And then a whole series of glaciers known as the College Glaciers. Intermixed among these are Harvard and Yale and Vassar and so forth. I can't remember which one is which, but you can always check out Google Maps. But you've got the relationship of the boat to show you about approximately how big these glaciers really appear. And another look at several of the colleges. And then back on the Kenai Peninsula, Ken decided he needed to go salmon fishing. So on the Kenai River, he hired a guide. Leslie came along for the ride, and Ken learned how to floss for salmon, which is using a unbarbed hook with no bait on it, because the salmon wouldn't eat anyway. They're not hungry. They're just going up the river to spawn. And you float the hook across the river, hoping to catch one of the salmon in the mouth. And Ken was successful and had a salmon that we then had created 4 meals out of. That's his guide, Kirster, who actually was a former street boarder. That is a snowboarder who basically did parkours on city streets that were covered with snow. You can see that on YouTube. Along the way, Ken did a hike on a glacier, and here he is getting some water that the guide said, yep, perfectly fine to drink from. No toxic chemicals or anything in it, just pure ice that's been frozen for a few years. And this is what the inside of a glacier looks like. At least this glacier. You've got ponds with our lakes and peaks of ice surrounding it. Or some places it's a bit more smooth and worn down looking. Another trip, and this is from Valdez with Captain Fred. Captain Fred has his own boat. He takes out about 40 or 50 passengers in his boat. And so here we have some sea lions along the way. And then this is entering one of the bays going up to the glaciers. One might be a little afraid, but when you realize Captain Fred has been doing this for 30 years in the same boat, you know that he knows what he's doing. And he inches his way through these, past cute little seals that are along the side, sitting and taking a break on the ice floe. And this is going back, and we're going to do the trip up to Dawson City, which is where the Klondike Gold Rush was. And this just gives an indication of the starting point. There is in Skagway, where we had landed, and the Chilkoot Trail, which is where the prospectors actually came up in the gold rush days. They landed, although here is Skagway down here, they actually landed in Dyea up here and started up the trail. Now you'll notice right here is the Canadian border. The Canadian Mounties decided that in order to ensure the safety of the prospectors, they all had to enter Canada with 1,000 pounds of supplies. Of course, obviously a lot of food and everything else. And if they didn't have their 1,000 pounds of supplies, they turned them back. Well, this is on the Chilkoot Trail. You'll notice that the prospectors are taking their supplies up a portion at a time. So they're making either 10 or 15 or 20 trips up that hill. Some of them did hire native guides in order to lighten their load. And once they'd gone in the hill and everything, up that hill, then they landed from Skagway up to about here. They then built a boat, and after the winter was over, they floated all the way down to Dawson in order to make their fortune. So this is the Klondike. Now the Klondike has been written up by many times, and there are many famous stories about it. And one of them is by Robert Servas, the cremation of Sam McGee. My father had the book of poems by Servas, and I read that as a kid.
There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that'd make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Lebarge. I cremated Sam McGee.
So that was Lake Lebarge, and part of the reason for going to Alaska was to see where Lake Lebarge actually was. Didn't find out where their marge was, and there was no remains of Sam McGee. However, there are some beautiful lakes along the way. Here's one with the was actually called the Green Lake, and you can see the Green Lake, and it was a green-blue lake actually, and you can see both colors reflected in there. And this is Dawson City, looking from a dome atop with the Yukon River, where the boats were flowing down with the prospectors. And now, many prospectors got there after most of the good claims were taken, and most of those claims were actually over in this area over here on another little tributary. Now, this was all placer mining, and placer mining is where the gold actually is among the gravel, and it's free, and you bring it up. You do it with the old gold pan to find the gold. However, that's a little tedious, and so a couple of years after the miners, the prospectors moved on, they brought in dredges, and the dredges would bring up the gravel and put it into a tumbler on the inside, and we're extracting all the gold that way through placer mining. And here is the dredges closer up. They would simply grab the gravel, bring it up, and then process it inside. You'll be aware that there was a lot of dredging going on, and much of the ecological damage caused by the dredging, which of course is no longer allowed. There were a lot of paddle wheel boats along the Yukon River. This is the Kena, one of them. This was actually used to carry ore that was processed for silver and other minerals actually in Wisconsin or Minnesota. And so all the ore would be transferred from this along several different other transport mechanisms to make it to the smelter that was in, as I said, all the way in Wisconsin. Now, The Call of the Wild by Jack London. This is Jack London's place where he lived, his hut, plus his storage facility on the right. Jack London actually was a prospector and worked for 1 year, but was unsuccessful. And then he found a bit more money in writing books. Close by, this is Robert Service's cabin. Now, Robert Service, the Cremation of Sam McGee, along with several other poems, sort of celebrate the gold rush. However, Robert Service actually did not arrive in Dawson City until after the gold rush was over. He was never a prospector, he was actually a banker. And then one day he started writing poems and found that he made more money off of his poems than he ever did as a banker. And so, and then this was probably one of the most beautiful campsites that we had. It was a little cloudy, but it was one of the provincial campsites in Canada, right on the water. So if we had our kayak, we could have just launched it right from there. And there were a few loons flying by and landing in the water. And many of the towns along the way, they have some heritage museums which celebrate the historical portions of both Canada and Alaska. This is a schoolroom in one of the Canadian Heritage Museums with the Canadian salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the empire for which it stands. One king, one empire, one law. That's for our Canadian friends. And now we're starting back on our way home. We went through Jasper and Banff in national parks in Canada, and this is the Columbia Glacier in Banff, and various other geological sites. This one's one of the waterfalls that was cut through a canyon. And as you can see, it's now into August, so the snows are off the mountain. And then out of Canada, back in the United States, this is near Great Falls, where Lewis and Clark actually had to portage around all of the Great Falls on their trip out west. And to the left there, you see the shortest river in the United States, approximately 290 feet long. It starts at a spring up on the left and then flows into the Missouri River. Back via Yellowstone, one of the less traveled roads in the park here. And of course, the mandatory stop at the mud pits in order to see the smoke and the exhalation. And this is one of our rare finds. Along the way to Dinosaur National Monument, we stopped off at the Flaming Gorge National Recreation Area. Now, we're only going to spend an hour or so because we want to get to the dinosaurs, but a volunteer in the headquarters suggested we ought to go out to Sheep Canyon. if we were interested in geological formations. And so we drove out there, and what is out there is where 500 million years of geological history is laid out along the roadway. So instead of the Grand Canyon where it's going up and down, these has all been turned, and you can see the formations going, as you can see them, they're going up and down rather than horizontally. And so we actually spent 2.5 hours doing this, and it got late, so we spent the night next to these formations. More of them that along the little drive. And now from Flaming Gorge, which is back on the Wyoming-Utah border, we wandered through southern states and made it to Natchez, Mississippi, where we visited another set of Indian mounds to sort of complete our journey that we started with the Cahokia mounds in Illinois. And these are some of the masks that the descendants of those indigenous people made, more in the current day. And finally, within our trip, where it turns out our van decided to have its own panorama that was left behind after our cleaning it. We just didn't hit this area, and so now we have our grand panorama of the U.S. to conclude our trip. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed a little trip to Alaska and back.